In our continuing study on the Gospel of Matthew, we find ourselves in this selection, reading from Matthew chapter 8 and verses 1 and 2. And I'm going to be reading from the translation by E.V. Rue in Penguin Classics. Matthew chapter 8, verse 1. When he came down from the hills, he was followed by large crowds. And there appeared a leper who approached him and did obeisance, saying, Lord, if you will, you can cleanse me. When you live in a northern climate like I do, and I have spent my life basically in a northern climate, there is something magical about spring. The days are getting warmer and they are getting longer. You get the first flowers of the season and the grass begins to green up. One of the markers of spring for me is spring training, when baseball teams gear up for the long season ahead. It is a time of year when you can believe your team has a chance to win it all. To me, the spirit of this time is magical, for it is a time of immense possibilities. Now, this may not work for you, but that is the way I approach this time in Jesus' ministry. It is a time of spring and the time of endless possibilities. And in Jesus' case, this means the crowds are still huge. Jesus has just given the greatest sermon in the world, and the people have not got it. You see, the crowds are huge, but they really do not get what Jesus is really about. They are not ready to admit that they do not have what it takes to be a successful follower of Jesus. Now, let's ask ourselves, is it an accident that at the start of the post-Sermon of the Mount ministry, Matthew has Jesus encounter a leper whose desire is to be clean? In other words, why did Matthew take this event? We're not saying it did not necessarily follow, but Matthew did not necessarily have to include it. We know that the gospel writers did not write everything that happened in the ministry and life of Jesus. This leper comes to Jesus with a cry if it is possible for this man to be made clean. This man had a cry of his heart to be able to live in mainstream society. His skin disease would make him a social outcast. So on one level, we would have to say that this man desired a normal life. Now, we know that the healing of this man would not necessarily bring about a transformation of his life and character. Physical healing does not necessarily equate and equal to spiritual healing. Matthew does not tell us what happened to this man. What is important is that this individual had a need and went to Jesus to be clean. This is the idea that I think Matthew is picking up here. This man seeks Jesus because of a need. Why did we come to Jesus in the first place? Why do we still come to Jesus? Clearly, we come to him with an expectation that he will meet our need or needs. There were many in Jesus' day who came to Jesus for that reason. Did Jesus respond to this leper because he had a need? Or did Jesus respond to this man because he could see through this man's need the need for a great spiritual awakening to the power and reality of God? I think it's fair to say that a lot of people come to Jesus in my day and age because of a need. There are people overwhelmed with how the wheels of their life have come off. There are people who have seen the emptiness of their existence. There are people who are suffering from an out of control addiction. People whose first desire may not be to come to Jesus to be clean, but they have a need, and it's that need that draws them to Jesus because they see that in Jesus the possibility of the need being met. But their desire is not so much to be clean. We come to Jesus for the need, but notice, we only stay with Jesus if what we eventually see is the need for us to be clean. The most experience of life is to feel the joy of a recent convert to Christ. They have had a burden lifted. They are excited about life. It is a moment not much unlike the season of spring. There is so much promise and so much hope. And if you are a baseball fan, you can still dream that your team will overcome all the obstacles to win it all. There is a bit of the unrealistic in this time. You see, as long as Jesus meets a need, it is easy to follow Jesus. What happens when Jesus becomes a bit demanding? What happens when Jesus rebukes your pet sin one time too many? You see, Jesus' ministry begins with crowds and ended up with a handful of people watching him die on the cross. It is easy to come to Jesus. It is harder to stay with Jesus. So did this one-time leper become a man of faith? Or was he simply satisfied to get from him what he needed? And that is always a question for us. Do we simply come to Jesus for a need, or will we stay that Jesus might clean us through and through?